Hi, this is Jason Gorber, editor-in-chief of thatshelf.com, here to talk about Sundance 2022 with some of my favorite people. We have Rachel West, we have Victor Stiff, we have Pat Mullen, and we have Rachel Ho here to talk about our experiences this year at the virtual Sundance Film Festival.
Big change.
Rachel, tell me about what your year experience was like, and if there any particular sort of standout moments on doing this virtual festival.
Which Rachel?
Rachel West, please. That is so funny.
Yeah. So this was my second time doing Sundance, so I've only done it virtually. I don't know. I had a very mediocre, middling experience. It sounds like I picked a lot of things that other people didn't pick. They weren't the ones people were talking about. So I found that I wasn't really that impressed compared to last year when I had standouts like Mass or a crowd pleaser like Coda. I didn't have that this year.
And Rachel, other Rachel, or first Rachel, whichever way we're going to fight over this. What was your experience like this year?
It was my first time doing Sundance. I hadn't done it before, so I didn't know what to expect other than kind of in comparison, I guess, to TIFF and the other film festivals that went online as well. I didn't have too much of a problem with it. I enjoyed most of the movies that I picked. I think that's probably down to a little bit of luck though, because I had no system in terms of picking my movies. But yeah, overall, I think it was a pretty good experience. The ticketing thing was a bit annoying, but overall, I think it was pretty fine.
We'll get a little bit into that inside baseball stuff in a moment. But Pat, first of all, what was your experience like? I guess this is the second time of you doing it virtually.
Yeah, so it's my second time doing Sundance. I thought it was a great experience. I didn't see as many of the films, kind of like Rachel was saying, that were necessarily big conversation pieces. But it was nice to see a lot of more like hidden gems. And I thought I tried to actually just focus on a lot of the doc competition because so many of the Oscar contenders for this year were in the doc competition last year. So I wanted to cover all those bases. And it was nice to just really focus on, two streams in particular. The World Cinema Documentary Competition was excellent. So yeah, highlights from there.
There you go. And Victor, what was your thoughts this year? I guess it's the third time you're doing Sundance, second time virtual.
I had a blast. I saw one soul-rocking film, which is what you hope for from any festival. Saw a bunch of films I really enjoyed and no stinkers. So I had a really high batting average for this one, and I just enjoyed every minute of it.
I guess you do it long enough, you know what to pick, something like that?
Yeah, it's in the blood at this point.
So let's dive in there. What was your soul-rocking film?
After Yang by Kogonada. There's films that you really love and they stay with you a long time. And then there's films you just you champion and you climb to the mountaintop and tell people about. And then there's films that just etch themselves into your soul. And that's what this movie is for me. I feel like, on my dying day, I'll be laying in bed as I'm fading away. And there's a good chance I'm going to think about this movie, just what it has to say about life and the connections we make and the legacy we leave behind. I just found it so moving. I can't wait to see it again. It's one of my all-time faves already.
There you go. Ms. West, I know you also saw that and that was one you were really looking forward to. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Cat was throwing up in the background. Yeah, it was definitely one of the ones that I was looking forward to the most, and it didn't disappoint. If I were going to list my top film of Sundance, it was probably that one by far.
And Rachel, did you get a chance to see it?
I did. I really loved it too. It was one, I think Victor said it probably perfectly. It was one of those that once it finished, I immediately wanted to start it all over again. And I actually, even though I probably shouldn't have done this, but for the awards over the weekend, I picked it again just so I could watch it again, which I'm going to do tonight.
Perfect. And Patrick, you got a chance to see it or you did not?
I did not, but I have time to watch 2 more tonight. And I think I'll add it based on the consensus. Because I skipped it because I think Elevation has it for Canada, I was sort of trying to skip one's distribution, but now I'm like, well, there's always too many movies in a week, so
again, and for me it's weird. I mean, I put it on my top 10 films of all time of 2021, not of all time for 2021, because I saw it in France last July. Now apparently the cut that I saw is a different cut than you guys actually experienced. Apparently there's an 11-minute discrepancy between what I saw in Cannes and there. And Brian Tallarico, who's one of my editors at Roger Ebert, intimated that maybe the reason that it was doing so much better at Sundance in terms of critical response was that it was cut down, and now maybe it's a better film. And I don't know, but my gut is that that's bullshit. And it's just the fact that in Cannes, people are looking for different kinds of movies, and the competition at Cannes was so much stronger what it was like directly up against, that it sort of was overwhelmed by certain other films. It was in one of the sidebars. It wasn't in a main competition the way that I felt it should be. So a lot of the people who are actually worried more about the Palme d'Or sort of competition films missed out on this one. Being at the world premiere there, I got a chance to speak to Kogonada and let him know how much it meant to me. I saw Columbus at Sundance, which was a really interesting experience seeing it there. It is not a film normally for me. It's that kind of slow cinema stuff that usually doesn't work for me unless it really works. And that's what I found so amazing, is that it does everything I want a film like that to be. It's so ruminative, it's so beautiful. And that was just a film about, like, you know, an American city with some lovely actors and stuff like that. And yet after Yang, just has all the stuff that people love about Yorgos Lanthimos in it, sort of that little stuff. It's the stuff that people like about Ex Machina, all these sort of semi-sci-fi, but not quite elements, character moments, even the stuff that people like about Terrence Malick, I love in this more than I do in that. So this absolutely, for me, is an absolute home run of a film, and I'm really pleased that you guys got a chance to see it. And Pat, you will obviously definitely get a chance to see it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add that I don't think I needed more time. Like, I thought it was lean. I thought it was perfectly paced. I didn't leave wishing any scenes had been longer. So maybe it is a cut down version that's doing much better. And then again, maybe, you know, for Victor and I to name that one our highlight, maybe it's just compared to the rest of the films, I didn't find anything that quite made it up to that level, at least in terms of a narrative feature.
And this film could have and should have played Toronto. So for most of us, this would have been a Toronto film. In any other year and any other structure. So that's in some ways an issue with how TIFF selection worked this year, that it waited until January to see another push. Because absolutely things like Worst Person in the World, which we think of as a Toronto film, a lot of people said, oh, that's my favorite Sundance film. So this is the weird thing when you're on the festival circuit. I've mentioned this before. It is actually quite common for a film to play Cannes, then Toronto, then Sundance. That's the sort of way. So it opens at Cannes, and then it sort of does the festival circuit. It can play Telluride, it can play New York, whatever. Then there's the films that play Toronto, then Sundance, and then Cannes, and those are very rare. That usually means that a film has tried to get sales in September, fails in January, and then is trying for European sales by the time it's May. And then there's that weird film that again starts at Sundance, goes to Cannes, and then goes to Toronto. Those tend to be documentaries, actually. We have Shane who has joined us. Hello, Shane. We'll let you settle in. We're waving to you, my friend. Hello, hello.
Sorry, I'm late.
It's all good, my friend. Shane Slater, we're just discussing sort of what things that kicked our asses, as it were. We're just talking about After Yang. Was there a particular film for you that absolutely rocked your world this year?
Not really. I liked quite a few of the films. I think Cha Cha Real Smooth was the most satisfying for me out of the films I saw. There wasn't like a Flea or a Summer of Soul or something like that this year, I think. But I really enjoyed most of what I watched. So overall, it was a good festival for me.
Tell the audience what Cha Cha is all about.
So Cha Cha Real Smooth is about a recent college grad who's trying to figure out his life, and he becomes a professional party starter. And at one of these bar mitzvahs, he meets this young woman played by Dakota Johnson, who is older than him, and they, you know, strike up a relationship. Well, not necessarily a relationship, but they have
a connection.
A connection, yeah. And it's just, you know, them dancing around whether they can really do this, and she has an autistic daughter and they have a great relationship, and it's just really a sweet, fun, romantic, very poignant at the end. So I think it just overall, it felt like the film that really accomplished what it set out to do of the films that I saw at the festival.
Did anybody else have a chance to see it? Rachel West, what did you think?
It was a very nice movie. It was definitely, of the ones I saw, one of the more favorable ones that I enjoyed. It was just, it was a nice story. And it was one that I hadn't really seen before. It was, it was all around. It was an entertaining film. I don't know if I'm going to be thinking about it 6 months from now, but I definitely enjoyed it as part of the festival.
Yeah, it's interesting that Dakota Johnson, for me, has sort of been elevated into this kind of weird indie darling. I think that she's sort of following somebody like a Kristen Stewart, who we knew so much more from the sort of blockbustery, or at least, societally, everybody was talking about the stuff that did her big breakthrough. But now she's making really interesting decisions and is in these films that I think really work. I guess Am I Okay is another one. Pat, I know you really enjoyed that. I'm wondering if you want to discuss that one.
Yeah, I thought Dakota Johnson was just this force of life, and I'm okay. I thought it was such a down-to-earth and funny take, and it really took me by surprise how the relationship between the friends developed, because I assumed it was going to be this thing where, like, okay, so she's coming out, and then her other friend is going to realize that she likes her, and they're going to get together at the end. I won't spoil it for people watching. But I found it really went in ways I was not expecting. And I thought it was like a really frank and funny look at how, like, sort of confusing coming out can be, and how, like, trying to navigate it with or without your friends is never easy. And so I thought there was just this, like, simplicity and the chemistry between the two leads was just great. So that was the narrative highlight for me.
I have two. I have said this before, but we're just putting it on the record. I have two sort of rules when it comes to this stuff. My favorite films are films that should be shit in art, that like are skating a knife's edge. I didn't see many of those. I didn't see any that were so so close to being terrible. That's what made them perfect. But as part of that general universe of that is exactly that moment where you're watching a film like, don't do this. Whatever you do, don't have this happen. Don't have these people hook up. Pat, you and I were discussing Pacific Rim. Whatever you think about Pacific Rim, the fact that it ends and they don't kiss is one of the great things about Pacific Rim, right? It's like, it's that moment, like, please don't do this. And in a funny thing, for me, episode 9 of all things, the silly Star Wars movie, when they do kiss, you're like, oh, why? Why did you do not need to do this? The other one's my frontline rule, but that's about documentary. We'll get to that in a moment. But I'm just wondering if anybody else wanted to talk about these sort of Dakota Johnsonian, the Johnsoniverse. I don't know what we're at, or Johnsonissance. That's what we're looking for.
Well, she's also like Kristen Stewart in the sense that if you just tweet something nice about her, like this whole sea of strangers comes out and hugs you. It's like cover every film of hers at a festival for the traffic alone.
I tweeted about, because I also thought she was just outstanding, and I tweeted something and I just got like hundreds of likes. Words. I had a question. This is just my second Sundance. I don't know how many you guys have been to. It felt like there were a lot of genre films this year. Was that much more than what we're used to seeing at Sundance?
So there's a film a couple of years ago you might have heard about called Get Out, and what happened with that film was people realized, oh, this is what we can bring to Sundance and make money at. What you are witnessing is a general theme. I don't think that there's necessarily more, but there's certainly more in higher profile than there ever was. Midnight at Sundance has always been about flick. I guess this was my 8th, 9th Sundance. And even prior to that, I was following it a little bit closer. So the midnight movies are never Midnight Madness style. They're not like TIFF at all. They're actually closer, weirdly, to the midnighty stuff that plays stuff like It Follows, like much more intellectual, much more sort of cerebral, and almost always using genre as a heavy duty metaphor. So I think what you're seeing and what you're picking up on is less to do with a change in Sundance than a change in film going in general, which is the recognition, and this has been going on in international cinema for as long as I've been covering this, for 27, 28 years, is that they realize if you make it a vampire movie, it'll sell as a vampire movie. And then you make it something that it's a social drama about Iran or about Indonesia or about whatever.
Exactly what we saw with Nanny. Yeah.
So Nanny is exactly, but Nanny, if you think about it, Nanny is essentially a cousin of Atlantique, and even has a woman whose last name is Diop in the film, right? So so this is exactly what's happening globally, because the recognition is that through genre you can tell richer stories and still find a market for them. This started with the Koreans and the Danes, and they've been the absolute geniuses of this for decades. But you're starting to see it now in English language cinema, because English language independent cinema has been crushed so much by marketplace stuff that they're looking for other ways, other hooks that they can go in. So I think what you're picking up on is incredibly smart. I just think that it's not Sundance. I think it's where we're at globally in terms of the marketplace and what plays. And I think if you look at something like Get Out, when they realized that they could do that, they could have something that was financially blockbuster and genre and socially hypothetically saying something, that if you start rapping at that, then it's just much easier to pitch. It's like, ugh, I don't want to watch a zombie movie. I'm like, but it's a zombie movie like this. Now, Dee Crimmins, who's obviously part of our team, is writing a book on Romero. Like, this is not new. Genre has been doing this since it's the 100th anniversary this year of Metropolis, right? None of this is new. What's new is the marketplace is elevating this. And instead of getting what we were getting, which is a very specific kind of genre, which is the Quentin Tarantino children, for years, that's what you would get. You would get the Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead. You'd get that kind of era of really smart, hooky genre stuff, sort of on a gangster flavor. And we got that a little bit with Aubrey Plaza this year, but we're really now getting into the ghost stories, the sort of more horror elements, the more overt stuff. And I think that, yeah, you're picking up on that. The programmers are unafraid to show this stuff and allow an audience to see that. Anyway, there's my rant about all that stuff.
That marketplace discussion is interesting in the sense that, you know, the Sundance movies are now becoming more mainstream, not necessarily bigger, but they're like more theater friendly. But now the deals are for streamers.
Right.
So it's like we're at this new place, but if it was like 10 years ago, or even when Get Out was a big theatrical play, and now I don't even know if Get Out might have gone to like Apple or something, you know. It's interesting to see those things happening at the same time.
It is a very, very complicated conversation to have, that the person who made Sundance what Sundance is currently in prison. And that Miramax no longer exists to foster this kind of talent and to bring it not only theatrical success in terms of financial, but also award success. That you would birth these films there, and then they would go on over the year. They would essentially be discovered at Sundance, play the fall festivals, that be up for Oscar consideration. That doesn't happen in quite the same way, although the streamers are trying really hard, but that's a whole nother complicated conversation. Go on, please.
So are there things that people saw that they think could be in the awards conversation next year?
Documentaries.
Yes. But even then, I would agree with Shane. Like, there wasn't a Flea or Summer of Soul as great as the docs were.
But there was a Leo Grande, and I bet you Leo Grande is going to be the film that come September, when more people are going to see it, is going to be that thing that people are enriched by. But yeah, Pat, you agree?
Oh, I agree. I think Emma Thompson, it just kills it. That's such a funny and vulnerable performance. And, you know, I think we're seeing a lot now, especially this festival, of like films that have been produced entirely during COVID. And there's a lot of small cast movies. And this one, it works because it's just so intimate. Versus a lot of the other ones, you're like, okay, like Resurrection was one I was watching with my brother, and we're like, okay, this looks like everyone in the background is kind of fake. Like the office is kind of empty. Like, it looks like they shot it for $20. There was some other COVID or
Well, let's go back to Leo Grande, just if we stick on that. For that film, again, should not work for me at all, because I don't really like stagey things. I don't like things that are sort of in one room, unless they're done really well and incredible performances. And so that absolutely feels like a production that you could actually make. You either make a hotel room or get one, and then it becomes relatively closed. You don't need those sort of grand. It is true, Sundance has never been one for grand production values, unless it's an international film where they're in the middle of the Atacama Desert, right? So that's where the international stuff comes through. But Rachel Ho, did you have anything? Did you get a chance to see, first of all, Leo Grande, and did you have any response to the whole genre elements that Shane brought up?
Yes, I did see Leo Grande. I really, really enjoyed it. I didn't know what it was really like. The synopsis doesn't. I don't know. When I read the synopsis, I wasn't really sold by it. I'll be honest. I was
We're going to go
like,
back
okay.
to synopsis in a sec, but first tell me what you thought of the film.
Yeah, I just kind of thought like, well, it's all right. I watched it mainly because it's Emma Thompson, and I like Daryl McCormack from Peaky Blinders. So I was like, okay, it's cool. I'll see what these guys do. And then it ends up being an incredibly beautiful movie. Just so simple in a way, but it's not simple in the slightest either. Unlike you, I actually really like the stagey type movies. I didn't realize I liked them until I was kind of looking back, and I realized a lot of my favorites happen to be those things. I went, I guess I do like those.
Are you a big play person? Not to interrupt,
I am,
but,
yeah. That's like, I don't know why I didn't make that connection earlier.
Yeah.
I was just like, no, I'm not that person. But I loved it, and I just thought like they should make it into a play. I don't know if it's like, I think it's possible. One thing too is I don't really like Katie Brand very much. Her humor I'm not a huge fan of, so I went in really with pretty low expectations. And then it just, maybe that helped because it blew me out the water. I thought it was just such an incredible movie. In terms of the genre stuff, this is my first Sundance, so I was a bit surprised because I was expecting it to be very indie heavy, like you guys are talking about the Dakota Johnson stuff. That's what I've always associated Sundance with, is like quirky, weird indie movies, not genre films. That is more like in Canada, like Fantasia Festival or something like that. That is what I associate those with more. So I was surprised that there were so many horror movies, and I thought maybe there's just, I don't know, maybe people are just in kind of a horror mind space at the moment because of everything that's going on, and that's what is being produced right now. But yeah, I take your point too, that that's post Get Out. That's just something that everybody's wanting to see now, and that's what people are wanting to consume. But it is an interesting like discussion to have as well.
Victor, you're somebody who navigates this stuff really thoroughly. What was your response to how did this feel super different than the last two for you?
I'm a bit of a maniac when it comes to plotting out how we do these schedules. So I go through every film in the catalog and I color code them and I rank them, and then I kind of work backwards and prioritize what I can see and when. So we did that, and then Sundance did a funny thing when they switched over to all virtual, where they took all our tickets back and we had to go back and order. So I was a bit pissy about having to do that again, and I had a bit of a scramble, so I didn't get the things that were on my original list. So I just kind of, went by the seat of my pants and took some things maybe I normally wouldn't see. And I mean, that's what you would do at an in-person festival, is you have a few hours to kill and you just kind of step into something that looks interesting. So I probably discovered a few films I wouldn't have caught just being so meticulous. Do
you have a good example of one that you didn't think you were going to see, you saw and then you loved?
Well, Leo Grande for sure, just because I just saw Emma Thompson there, right? And she's never bad in anything, and I love a good coming of age movie, and it checks that box in a couple ways. What else? Nanny was an interesting film, just because I really didn't know what to make of it. The way they kind of pitched it wasn't the film that I got, but because I just kind of took a flyer on it, I wasn't disappointed. I was just down for whatever kind of weird film they were going to give me. I was a little bit more appreciative of it than if I sat down. I'm like, I'm definitely getting a Get Out kind of film. Then I would have felt like I was missing out.
So I don't know if anybody else had a chance to see Nanny. That's actually a really good example of a film that was trying so hard in some ways to navigate genre tropes and undermine them. And I think it didn't get either of them right. There's so much there that you're really appreciative of, the performances, the elements that they're drawing in. They're trying to do this sort of social commentary in a really interesting, engaging way. And yet it never feels scary, and it never feels super smart's the wrong word, but it never feels that beautiful balance that you get with real and incredible genre pieces. And again, you're talking to somebody who's not the largest fan in the world of Get Out, but I'm a huge fan when genre pieces do echo that, do that. And I'm just using that as the example that everybody went crazy for that film. And part of why they went crazy for that film is because it was a horror movie that had indie cred. Right, that's what we're getting out of it. Shane, did you get a chance to see the film?
Yeah, I saw Nanny and I totally agree with you. I think I personally found the social drama aspect of it really well done. I thought that was excellent. But then the way they did the supernatural elements didn't fully click for me.
Right.
And I thought the ending, they did a good job leading up to, you know, that pivotal moment in the end, and then after that it just kind of like rushes through and kind of makes it seem insignificant when it really isn't. It's such a powerful event that happens.
We're dancing around.
Well, you have plot movies where it's like, here's the killer, we have to find out who this person is, and you're hooked on the mystery. And then you have vibe movies where you just sit back and the movie kind of washes over you. There's beautiful visuals, the music, you just like spending time with the characters. And it's like it tries to be both at times, and then it gets to the end, and this is a movie where you just have to be patient and hang back and let it rush over you, and then it yada yada is the ending, and that just you got to stick the landing, right? And it feels so incoherent with the movie you just spent an hour and a half watching, and you just walk away feeling like something's not right.
That's a really eloquent way of putting it. I love that notion of yada yada the ending, but I think it's specifically this, and this goes back to one of my own another nonsense bit, is so many of these films work for people that don't watch genre films, right? So they get a sense of the excitement of it. It's like, ooh, I'm watching something that I don't normally watch, and they get super excited. And if you've seen 1,000 of these films before, you're like, yeah, it's okay, but you know, it's not nothing. In other words, they're entering a pool in order to get the cachet and haven't really learned to swim the way other people were. Fantasia, Rachel Ho, you brought it up. Fantasia, I go to Fantasia and I'm wading through Drek. I am desperate for that film that's just going to kick my ass, because, and I've said this directly to Mitch and the programmers, as obnoxiously as it is I'm looking for the film at Fantasia. And God bless the programming there. Those movies exist for people like me that use the genre trappings but are making a real movie, that are not there just for the audience to hoot and holler every 10 minutes, which is a sort of dumbed down or at least straight up genre film that's just genre. And then you have the sort of art film that's trying to be genre. But if you get that sweet spot, I get super excited. And I didn't get a huge sense of that, especially with something like Nanny, which again has all the ingredients there to be something amazing. And it just doesn't, it not only does it not stick the landing, I just don't think it sticks all the elements. But yeah, Patrick and Rachel West, you did not see Nanny, correct?
No.
But did you see anything else like that sort of made you feel got there but didn't quite stick the landing? Because that is a typical Sundance thing.
Not really. I mean, I think actually Babysitter was one on the genre front that I really wanted to like it, and I think it could have gotten there, and it had that surreal manic energy, but it was just like hit the accelerator got caught to the bottom of the car, and they just kept driving and it crashed. And but it didn't crash. Like I, opened the door and
sounds like Dumont's France. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, like it just didn't shut up.
Yeah, fair enough. And Rachel, was there anything? I mean, I know you're really into this stuff when it works. Look, let's go back to a film that probably should have worked for you. There was a film that was very X-Files-y.
There was? Oh, is it Something in the Dirt?
Correct.
I like, going back to what Pat said about Resurrection looking like it was made for $20. I'm pretty sure Something in the Dirt was made for $20.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it works so well. It's the Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. I'm a big fan of their films. I like them on screen as actors. I'm a big fan of Spring. I like The Endless. I even kind of like Synchronic. I like what they're putting out. And this is a bunch of friends making a movie, low budget, at home during the pandemic, but they did it in such a way where the sci-fi elements, like it's, very lo-fi, but it was intriguing. It was interesting on screen. And I just really like the dynamic that they had on screen with these two characters that they've invented. It's definitely one of those, highlights for me, despite some of the weird technical issues with that screening. I know it caused a lot of people. But yeah, I wouldn't have chosen to watch it on my laptop. I would have liked to have seen it on a TV screen at least,
or a screen with an audience.
And I think that would have been, a fantastic experience with an audience out of anything else that I've seen, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that one, that for me is, for those that saw it, that really is what the type of film that has been playing midnight at Sundance for some time. I think of a Mandy, that's sort of a much more over the top version, but that DIY film about filmmaking, but you're going to put it within the context of something that's grander. Yeah, that felt for me very Sundancey in a good way, it's unapologetically a love letter to independent American filmmaking, right? And if Sundance is littered with that stuff on a regular basis, and it was nice to see that sort of there. Did anybody else get a chance to see it? Oh, just the two of us. There you go.
I just want to say one of the other movies, though, that really had me, not so much a genre movie where I was on the edge of my seat, but Emergency. Oh, and I thought was just fantastic. It was just, to me, that was sort of what I would expect from Sundance, not a very big story, big movie, but I just love the interaction of the characters in it.
So before we go too far, I sort of want to bounce back and forth. Obviously, documentary is such an incredibly important part of Sundance. I've been saying as long as I've gone that Sundance is one of the greatest, if not the world's greatest documentary film festival, and it's a pretty good fiction film festival. That being said, I'm wondering, we can sort of go around. I know Pat and I watched too many documentaries, but were there any particular works of nonfiction that really worked with you? Victor, did you get a chance to see any docs?
Kanye doc, Jesus. That's going to be 4 hours long. They only gave us the first hour and a half. It went by in a snap, and I felt like I could have sat there and watched the whole 4 hours. I was completely riveted. Just taking
now, do you like Kanye going into it?
I have mixed feelings. I still love his music. I separate the man from the music. I admit he's problematic at times, but if you just ended it where the film ends, and you turn that to a work of fiction, it would be an incredible Rocky caliber underdog tale, right? You can watch it as a hip hop time capsule. You can see it as the rise and fall of a tragic figure. There's so many ways to enjoy this film. And just seeing Kanye going into Rockefeller Records and trapping people in the room and playing music for them, it's kind of encouraging and uplifting and sad at the same time that he's just so manic and so inconsiderate of the people he's kind of performing to. But there's something about knowing you have a certified unassailable genius, and even his work can't be recognized unless he goes to bat for himself. I love seeing that story on screen.
I have been saying for years, I've said this to you, it's sort of a joke. We've had this conversation actually in Sundance, I believe. What the fuck's a Kanye? I still to this day do not understand. I understand him as a social thing, as in the way that I understand his ex-wife. I understand Kim Kardashian. I get that. But on a musical basis, I've never really got Kanye's contribution. I see all his producers and what they've done, but him as an individual. So I am genuinely looking forward to open-eared watching this documentary, but I was not going to. My neurosis is that there's no way I'm watching part 1 of 3, right? I'm just not doing that, because I'm going to see this as a whole project before I evaluate it, but that's my level of crazy. Did anybody else see that film or give something else nonfiction that they want to talk about?
I did see the Kanye. And I think it did a very good job of showing his contribution as a producer and artist, because I'm not a big Kanye fan. I didn't read the programming notes and didn't know I was watching 1/3 of a movie or series, so I haven't reviewed it. But I'm 100% watching parts 2 and 3, and I think you'd be surprised. It's definitely worth going, regardless of what you think of Kanye.
I'm 100% open to watching it. I'm excited to watch it for sure. going in assuming that I'm going to hate it, because as I do for almost every movie. Speaking of going in and assuming I hated it, there was one film that asked a question that I think a lot of people would actually disagree with, or sorry, stated something that a lot of people would actually see as a question, which is we need to talk about Cosby. Shane, you got a chance to see it, I believe?
No, I didn't.
Oh, you ended up not seeing it. Who got a chance to see the Cosby doc? Rachel, what did you think of the film?
It's a lot to take in, and it's 4-hour version. I would have much just mentally, I would have liked to have the segmented break. I do like the way Kamau Bell has structured it, where it is really one of those things where you can't talk about Cosby's legacy without him being a sexual predator and all of the complications and complicated feelings that come out of it, whether you are a comedy person, whether, you grew up with him on TV. It's a lot to take in, but I really like the way he structured it, which is sort of by the decades, start to finish, but woven into that, it's, while he was doing this on the Cosby Show, he was drugging and raping, allegedly these women. So I like the way they presented it. It wasn't one or the other. It was these things were both happening at the exact same time. And I think, Bell himself even said, there's a lot of things that Cosby, if he were to sit down and watch this, would agree with, would like, things about, his early days as a stand-up, becoming, this undeniably huge pop culture figure. Yeah, Bill Cosby would be okay with that. He's not going to like a lot of the other truths that come out. So I really enjoyed it as much as one can enjoy something that's that heavy of a subject matter.
When we talked about films that could be really terrible, but I think are actually quite extraordinary, this one absolutely was for me. I had the pleasure of speaking with him for POV Magazine. We had a really amazing conversation, Mr. Bell and I. I'm a big fan of his, and I love that the film wears its ambivalence on its sleeve, on every frame. And it's doing something that's hard, and frankly, something that Sundance has gotten worse at, which is to challenge its audience. We talk about the genre stuff, and that's where it sort of is like it's provocative stuff, but it's not doing it. It's a lot of what we saw is speaking already to an audience that's already there to agree with it. And I think that the Cosby doc does something much harder, which is it is the film for the person who says, I never want to watch this. It really is. And Sundance very much was, for a long time, for many years, that it's the I only like movies, or I only like superhero movies. Now it's like, well, here's some other stuff for you to sort of chew on. It's going to be heavier, it's going to be harder, but you're going to get something out of it. In terms of nonfiction, I'm a big fan of films that actually sort of engage in that, or projects. I don't know if we want to call it films, to Pat's point.
It's TV,
but that's a whole nother story. That's a whole nother story.
I think he really nailed it on. Yes. This is how you have a discussion about Bill Cosby, and this is everything that you need to take into account. So I thought the execution of it was great. I recommend, I think it's a Showtime doc. I recommend everybody watch it in those 1 hour increments as episodes.
And it does something that I love that documentaries do, which is that the film itself got changed by actual events. So, and that he, as a filmmaker, and his group of filmmakers were able to continue navigating it rather than throw up their hands. And then the other big thing that came out of our conversation, which he touches on in the film, is I love that Bill Cosby in some ways taught Kamau Bell how to tell this story about Bill Cosby. And that sort of meta stuff, to recognize that Bill Cosby is being judged on terms and ideas that Bill Cosby publicly promoted, and that's the petard on which he's hung, is very, very fascinating, and that I think is remarkable. Were there any other documentaries that kicked anyone's asses?
Well, my favorite.
No, Rachel, just, and then we'll go back to Shane. Rachel.
Sorry, Shane. It didn't necessarily kick my ass, but I found it incredibly interesting, and it was Free Chol Soo Lee. The reason I liked it so much is I just had no idea about that story, and I think that there's a nice movement right now. I don't know if it's because of all the things that have been going on in Canada, and particularly more so in the States in terms of like anti-Asian hate and things like that. I don't know if that's the reason that more stories are starting to come to the front, but I'm glad that I know that story, and I'm glad that I know the kind of, it was not more so about the, or sorry, I should say the documentary is about a Korean American man in San Francisco back in the 70s who got accused and charged and imprisoned for murder, which he didn't do. And the reason that they were able to get him a new trial was because of a grass movement's organization of various Asian American communities. So it was, I think it was some Koreans, Chinese Americans, and Japanese Americans as well. And they all came together, which is very rare. We don't typically do that. And they all came together and they worked to help free this man because they all realized what was going on, that there was a terrible injustice. And I felt kind of ashamed almost that I didn't know about it. But I thought something as important as this, like, you should know about it. And when I looked it up, it turns out a lot of people don't know about it. It was a very, very quiet story at the time and kind of lost, I suppose, over the decades. And I know there was another incident, it was Vincent Chin, which is a bit more well known. But this one, I had no idea. And he passed away in 2014, I believe. So he hasn't had a chance to see it. But I really enjoyed that documentary just for the fact of feeding me a story that I didn't know.
Now,
I appreciate that.
Now, this is always a complicated question. How is it as a movie? In other words, dividing, we talk about art and artists. I'm dividing the caliber of filmmaking versus the importance and relevance of the story. Does it work as a movie, or is it an interesting story? Sometimes those are not always the same thing.
I think it works as a movie. My biggest gripe about it was they did try to do like a reenactment of the crime, which always comes off kind of cheesy. It reminds me of like old A&E documentaries from like back in the day. But other than that, I think it worked really well. Like, they had the majority of the people who were involved, like the past lawyers and the activists and advocates, they all came back and spoke on his behalf. He had written a memoir himself, so they had somebody read his story throughout. So it was a really tight narrative arc as well from beginning to end. And yeah, it was really well done in terms of being really well balanced as well, because he wasn't exactly a perfect individual either. He got involved in things that he probably shouldn't have got involved in, and the film didn't try to hide that fact and just hold him up as this untouchable hero. He was very fallible, and but they did tie that really well together. So I think it was really well put together.
Yeah, it's the anniversary this year of Paradise Lost, the Sanofsky-Berlinger film that opened at Sundance and helped change nonfiction cinematically. It became this huge success, shot on film with a music score, all the stuff we sort of take for granted now, all these years later. And so it's interesting to see the children of that film continuing to be perpetuated. I'm going to go to Pat in a sec. I know he's got about 50 to talk about. Was there any other nonfiction stuff that you guys sort of wanted to address, just sort of where we're on here? Shane, you were about to say something earlier.
I was going to mention Descendant, which was such an interesting story for me. It's about this community in Alabama, which is directly, the people who live there are direct descendants of the people who came over on one of the I think it was the last slave ship which came illegally to Alabama decades after the slave trade was abolished.
The Clotilda.
And the way they preserved that history is just amazing to watch. And like, there's just so many really fascinating things that she has access to, like one of these early films shot by Zora Neale Hurston of Cujo Lewis, who was one of the last survivors of that slave ship. Just to see that, and to also, they have readings from her book, which she wrote about him, and you hear his words in his dialect, which is so tremendous. And then on top of that, they have the search for that slave ship, the Clotilda, and it's this historic artifact, this historic thing that happened, and yet it downplays that and kind of moves past it to like look at the legacy of slavery and what these people are dealing with now. So I thought that was a really nice touch, to be like, okay, we found the Clotilda, but these people are kind of suffering through a whole new challenge now with industry and toxic chemicals causing high rates of cancer and all these other things. So I thought it was really well told and shot, and her approach to it was just brilliant to me. I mean,
which is I had the absolute opposite experience, which is really interesting, is that I thought this was a magnificent story, completely poisoned by terrible filmmaking. And the film got in the way of this incredibly important story that will be not watched because of a over 2 hour or around 2 hour film, which meanders like the river that it's sitting beside. But instead of coming across as poetic, it just felt unedited. It felt like every storyline thread wasn't really addressed, wasn't really touched upon, that the moments that are meant to be poetic just became pedantic. And it's all this stuff that it broke my heart, because I'm 100% with you. The way you describe the chills I get, the way you describing this film is better than me having watched the film. And that's where it really breaks my heart, because nonfiction does that to me in a way. If a fiction film fucks up, whatever, right, we go on. But when a film like this, a story like this, which is so incredibly nuanced and sophisticated and important to address for those that are descendants of here, or not descendants of whatever narrative you want, the film for me got in the way of its storyline. The Boeing film was another one for me, whereas like the film is atrocious, but the story is incredibly important. And there's a bunch of those. Activist docs tend to do that for me, is that like, sure, it's the subject matter is really important, but the film does almost nothing. But anyway, there's my rant. So it's very interesting. I'm so glad you had a very positive experience with it. That one, I was like pulling my hair out, because I'm like, you are ruining this story by making a bad movie. And that is breaking my heart. Victor, I know you're muted, but did you have any sort of crazy experience with nonfiction?
No, I kept it pretty limited.
Oh, the Kanye. You talked about the Kanye. We're looping, but yeah, go on.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot. I only saw a handful of them. The Kanye one stood out. I saw another interesting one that was unlike anything I've seen before. It's called We Met in Virtual Reality. And the entire film is set in a virtual social media platform called VR Chat. And it's just about these people who, during the pandemic, went online and started forging these connections, and they have these intimate relationships. They've met in person. One person teaches American Sign Language. There's someone who goes in there and they teach improv classes. So you can really see the migration of our real lives onto these social media platforms. And this is definitely, it's kind of niche now, but it's something we're all going to be involved in the next 5 or 10 years, especially with Facebook or Meta jumping on the VR bandwagon. So I think it's a good look at, where we're headed for social media in the near future.
I mean, we'll absolutely see. For as long as I've been going to film festivals, they've been saying that VR is the next big thing. I think the technology is finally getting there in terms of the imagery, and the creativity is absolutely there. I don't know if it's going to be niche. I don't know if it's going to be too video game. I don't know if it's going to respond. We will see. But I think that the push, I think you're absolutely right. Now, Pat and I are just going to have a little bit of nerding out because we watched dozens of docs each. So, Pat, I got a list here, or we're going to go through what we got. So sure. we're going to quickly go through them. I want like sort of 30 seconds about who saw what. So, Aftershock was yours?
Yeah.
Run.
Oh, sorry, you wanted so. So it was in the subgenre of reproductive rights movies at Sundance about how Black women are disproportionately faced with death in the US system. And they're talking, the analogy the film uses is that, for a woman giving birth is like being a Black man stopped by the police. And it's just about like the things you have to weigh if you're going to have a baby and risk your life. I think it's a really interesting example of how documentaries are struggling to fit everything in and change during COVID, because it has a really clear, passionate story with great characters. And then they try to bring in the pandemic and George Floyd, and those are things that with the story you have to account for. And it doesn't quite stick the landing because it goes in so many directions. Right. But it's great characters.
Descendant, we've already talked about. Mark Brown's Descendant. The Exiles, which actually ended up winning an award. I saw it. Pat, you did see it as well?
I watched it yesterday.
Yeah.
So
that's Ben Klein and Violet Columbus, daughter of Chris Columbus, the director. So you have Steven Soderbergh and Chris Columbus as the producers on this. So you'd think like kid of famous person is going to make a film. It's going to be a little bit obnoxious, but Pat, what did you think of it?
well, so I went in with reservations because I know you weren't a fan of Christine Choi, and it's interesting. Rachel mentioned Vincent Chan, and Christine Choi's big film was the Who Killed Vincent Chan.
Exactly.
I thought she was one of the most exasperating and fascinating characters I've ever seen in a documentary. Like, she doesn't shut up. She doesn't stop smoking. She's, talking about how Trump should take a bullet. She's like directing the directors. And it's such an interesting look at an iconoclastic character. And
you want to kill her and be adopted by her. Like, it's like both of those things simultaneously.
Yeah. Like, I was quite impressed. And they do a very good job of showing how like an artist's voice shapes what they document, and how in her case, like, as one of really two Asian American women at the time who were really breaking through and like being nominated, she just kind of fell through.
And yet it's also a story. So it's a story of her, but it's also the story of the subjects. It's a story of contemporary China. Rachel, did you get a chance to see it, or you did not see it?
I did not.
I recommend everybody see it. Yeah. It will be as engaging, as frustrating as the character is, and that's what's really interesting. In a funny way, it's a very New York version of Faces Places. Like, it's like that Agnes Varda is just so charming and wonderful in French and bubbly. Picture a very New York sort of CBGB version of that, with somebody who's a chain-smoking, iconoclastic, give no shit, and yet clearly a very humanist filmmaker. It's a really interesting way of doing that. So there's my little spiel about that. Then Fire of Love, I have to go on about Saradosa's film. If I had to pick one film I was really hoping that wouldn't let me down, it was this. I'm a huge fan of volcanoes. I'm a huge fan of nature docs that tell a story, that use archive footage to elevate the narrative of those that actually did it. I was a huge fan of Jane. I'm a big fan last year of Becoming Cousteau, and now I'm a big fan of Fire of Love, and then it got picked up by National Geographic, so it's continuing that sort of trend. Did anybody else sort of want to jump in about the beauty of watching a bunch of volcanoes blow up, but also these two really interesting individuals as they wander around? Jump in.
Well, I loved it as much as you did. It reminded me a lot of Sunshine Superman, which was an archival film at TIFF a few years ago, about the base jumper who would attach like a Super 8 camera to his helmet and then
just fling himself off here.
And this was one of those ones that, like, I mean, going in kind of how it ends, but just like you get such a good sense of living your passion so fearlessly. And just the footage is, I would love to see that in like Cinema 2 at the Lightbox with the sound
no.
big screen.
Cineспhere, my friend.
Cinesphere,
we're aiming for Cinesphere. Chol Soo Lee, we talked about. I didn't see you there.
That was fascinating.
Yeah,
that's going to be at all the festivals, I think.
Okay,
and
super quick.
If you're looking for
quick, what's it about?
It's a tour of the city from the perspective of the director in his wheelchair.
Right.
And it's like you're only seeing it from his point of view. So it's a really radical first-person account of disability and access.
The Janes, that was yours. Exactly. Jihad Rehab, super complicated. Pissed off a lot of people. So I don't want to go too far off. I don't want to go too off the road here. But for those of you who didn't see Jihad Rehab, I actually haven't watched it yet. I'm wanting to. But basically, Pat, you have a better way of telling you about it. The woman goes to Gitmo and then doesn't go to Gitmo. So go ahead.
Well, so it's about a rehab facility in the Middle East where former Gitmo detainees are taught how to re-enter civil society. And I mean, the access she gets is amazing. That could not have been easy interviews to land, but the questions are very much framed from a Western perspective. And it dances a very problematic line.
There we go. Lots to talk about. And then who she's going and talking to the Saudis and underplaying. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
On the opposite of that is Navalny, which I actually got to cover and got to interview the person. And I don't know, did anybody else see Navalny? Were you guys jumping in that? Right. So Navalny is the story, an Israeli film about the stories that a bunch of soldiers told about during the War of Independence. It's incredibly. Sorry, I'm an idiot. You see what I'm doing there. Navalny, I also covered. Navalny is extraordinary film, which is about a Russian politician. Absolutely incredibly well done. Who would have known that there was a jump from doing a film about Robbie Robertson to actually covering this? It is the good version of Citizen 4. It's what Citizen 4 dreamed of being. And the fact that it got an Oscar is preposterous. This film absolutely means demanding. And you're absolutely right. We're going to go to Tentura. But yeah, Pat, you ended up seeing it again very briefly. I don't want to keep the others waiting too long.
Yeah, I agree. It's the movies like Citizen 4 was all about the get. But this one, they didn't just throw a camera on a hotel room table and be like, oh, look what we did. This one, like the access is amazing, but also the questions, the insight, and just, I don't know, I think it hit every mark. 2
words for TikTok boom.
Yeah.
Exactly. 1 word. Perfect. And then just super quick, because again, documentaries mean a hell of a lot. All That Breathes, phenomenal movie. Did anybody else get a chance to see the Birds movie? Again, just sort of, yeah, exactly. Welcome to all the movies. Well, this is what we were all watching.
I loved it.
Yeah. A film about these 3 sort of individuals that are caring for a bunch of birds, kites, that sort of hang out at a garbage dump. It sounds preposterous, and yet it's incredibly beautiful, incredibly cinematic.
Well, and the whole thing's a metaphor for like India's caste system and the religious divides between Hindus and Muslims, and how like people don't like, because it stems, their clinic for caring for these birds stems from the fact that a doctor wouldn't treat them because the birds ate meat. And so it's like, are you going to, withhold care and whatnot from people based on their beliefs and different value systems and whatnot?
So, which brings to the whole point, and that's sort of why I phrase it that way. And thank you, Pat, for picking up the bait, as it were. Rachel, you mentioned before that you were reading the summaries of these films. There is no festival in the world that has worse summaries than Sundance. That the complete hoodwinking that takes place when you actually see the stuff, I think it's a combination between the films are very new, so they don't necessarily know what they are going to end up being when they're actually, nobody's responded to them, and they tend to be, because they're independent, they don't have like a big team that knows how to write these things behind it, and the programmers who should be doing that do a terrible job often of like bearing the lead. So if I told you it's a film about birds, you'd be like, I don't care about birds, but oh, actually it's a film about the chasm of identity in a post-partition India, but also about all the dynamics between these individuals. Plus, it's shot like some sort of weird, again, this poetic art film. It's all of those things. How the hell do you put that in a couple paragraphs? This is why all of us should be programming for Sundance. There we go. I put it out there. Okay, super quick as we're going through here. Calendar Girls, okay.
It was fun. I've seen it, but like, the old ladies dance.
Right.
Fun.
Housemaid of Splinters.
Brilliant. Ukrainian orphanage, very sad, but also hopeful.
Midwives.
Oh yeah, that was good. 2 good characters, beautifully shot. Verite.
The Mission was mine. Fascinating. A Finnish film about kids from Utah that go to Finland to be missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS members, and to have seen that in Utah would have been amazing. Nothing Compares, the doc. Rachel, you saw that. What did you think of Nothing Compares? Let's get you jumping in, so it's not just the 2 of us.
I mean, it was fine. It was an interesting way to present the story of Sinead O'Connor. I didn't really know that much about her. I also thought that it really picked and chose what parts of her life and story to include. It's pretty much the lead up to her being on SNL and ripping up the picture of the Pope. And then it kind of doesn't really cover sort of her later years, which have become a bit more controversial. It just sort of ends like, here's this woman who did this. But another one that you haven't mentioned yet is The Princess. I really liked that, the Princess Diana doc.
I was going through the competition ones, but yeah, there we go. Talk about The Princess, about how it worked.
I mean, I'm that person who got up at like age 14 to watch Princess Diana's funeral in the middle of the night. I like royal stuff. I thought going into this, you know what, I've just seen CNN's really great Diana docuseries. is this really going to give me anything new? And the fact that it presented it all without talking heads, without voiceover, just from archival paparazzi and news footage, I really liked the sort of the way it turned the story around to be not so much about Diana, but about this is what we, the people who are hungering for more on this woman have done and have created. It's the sort of the news mass hysteria turning her into a pulp culture icon that I really enjoyed that approach.
I mentioned Jane. Have you seen the O.J. Simpson one that Brett Morgan did? It was a 30 for 30, and all it is the new stuff of the Bronco chase. We have a film to watch. Pat, go ahead.
Well, I think The Princess, I would really put it in the same fashion as Amy. Like, it's such a great look at celebrity and the danger of that, and just, I mean, the archival, the seamlessness of the collage there is really impressive.
Just to wrap up the competition stuff, Sirens, you saw, Pat?
No, Rachel Ho covered it for us.
Well, there we are. Rachel, talk to me about Sirens.
I'll say it's okay. It's you said before, is it like a well put together film? I'll say it's not that well put together. I don't know why. There seems to be like a really big jump in the middle. And I
super
think
quickly, what's it about?
Oh, it's about a all-girl metal band in Lebanon.
Right.
That's pretty much what it's about. And it's really interesting. I found it really sweet. And I found it's more about one of the band members. It's more about like her kind of coming out story and just kind of growing up as well, like a coming of age story. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good. It's not quite though like the best documentary I would ever say that ever existed. It's not very well put together.
Then there's Tentura, which I talked about, which again, I think I'm the only one that saw.
I saw it.
Obviously, Pat saw, but of the Tentura, 100% of film well worth seeing, and one that is exactly this. If you think the Cosby doc is complicated, Tentura came out and immediately international news were using it to cite as war crimes on a state. so it is a very, very interesting thing that is happening in Israeli cinema, is that you have movies made in Israel that could not be made in any other country in the region, and then those countries in the region are using it as an excuse to pillory Israel. It's a fascinating dynamic at play, and well worth engaging with open eyes. I think it's a film that will not be watched open-eyed either by Jews in North America or by those that are so immediately knee-jerk reaction that everything that goes on in Israel is somehow judged so much more harshly than anything else that goes in a region. Is a fascinating and very, very sort of inside conversation that usually takes place in a country. And it's a conversation that has to happen. And this is a film that very well may change the entire trajectory of the way that people actually consider this war that took place in 1948. Very fascinating. Finally, The Territory, and then we met in virtual reality. We'll talk about, but The Territory, Pat.
Yeah, so that would be my pick for Best of the Fest. It's set in the rainforest in Brazil, about the Uru-Wow tribe, and their sort of fight against logging and resource extraction. And it's, I mean, I think first-time filmmaker, really incredible access, but also works collaboratively with the tribe to tell their own story. And where it gets really impressive, it does sort of what I was not expecting, gets as much access to the settlers, who are the ones setting the forest on fire, cutting down the trees, plowing through the roads. And it does a really balanced take by getting both perspectives. It's clearly on the side of the tribe. And then I think in doing that, it just shows how there's like two incompatible worldviews that I think it's not an easy situation to assess. And then, as far as activist docs go, it's really like one of those ones where the potential for activist documentary meets like the artistic potential, and it's just beautifully shot. And they really do like close-ups of all the animals in the rainforest, beautiful aerial photography, so you just get a sense of what's at stake.
Are there any really cat-like creatures? Is there anything that's four-legged and cat-like? That has to be made. The
cat game wasn't that strong, but I wouldn't fault the film for that. But it has just like some amazing twists. Like they work with a Brazilian activist, and like they're shooting an interview with her, and then someone's like, where's your trying to get a hold of her daughter, and like they can't reach the daughter, her phone's disconnected, and they're all like, oh, she was kidnapped. And so it's like everyone drops everything and like are trying to find her, and it's so intense. And you just see like the stakes that people are facing,
Right.
and then like one of the subjects is murdered, and it just shows how like differently the situation would have gone had the cameras not been there the whole time.
Right.
So I think like Nat Geo picked that up, and I think that will be for sure in the conversation next year.
There we go. Then there's other stuff like the Lucy and Desi, which is a mess. Like Amy Poehler is so like empty from this film. It's absolutely unbelievable about how we talked about Rachel, about the A&E nonsense, like that it just feels like that sort of generic shit that you would see on television. It's like, ugh, terrible. So there was some great stuff with the great. Anyway, there's our runabout nonfiction. I just want to bring up a couple titles. You guys are being very patient. Thanks for waiting as we sort of did that rundown. Who saw 892? What, Ms. West? I'm sorry?
I did.
Cool. I want to know what you both thought of 892. We'll start with Shane and then we'll go to Rich.
I enjoyed it. I thought, I mean, I think it's trying to be one of those throwback thrillers, but not quite. It doesn't quite have, first of all, the character isn't I guess menacing enough for it to have much excitement in the bank, the hostage situation. So the film is about this veteran who holds up a bank and threatens to bomb it because he's not getting the money that he's due.
Based on a true story.
Based on a true story, played by John Boyega. And so I think it's one of those films that, you know, it's telling an important story about, you know, what these people, a lot of veterans go through when they return. And I thought that aspect of it made it compelling for me outside of the whole hostage situation, which there isn't really much to it, because he lets most of the people out of the bank anyways, and it's just basically him. Sorry. But
it happens in the first 10 minutes, though.
It happens very early in the film, and it's a true story.
I'm kidding.
So that aspect didn't work as well, but the performances are great, and the film did win the Ensemble Award. So it has a good cast, including the late Michael Kenneth Williams. So the performances and the poignancy of the story is what I would recommend it for.
I spent the whole movie just being pissed that Michael Williams is dead. I mean, it's just one of those things. Like, he just elevates that film so much. Rachel and then Victor.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Shane said, but I thought it really didn't work for me as a whole. I thought, you know, it's kind of this very important and interesting story, but it's a very fine, mediocre film.
Great message, terrible movie. You can cut from like the 20-minute mark until the 1 hour, 20-minute mark, and nothing changes. Like, he just goes in there and there's no character arcs, nothing happens, there's no tension, there's no sense of stakes. You're just there. John Boyega is charismatic and magnetic, and you can't take your eyes off him, but there's nothing there for him to do. And you just walk away from the film saying, I agree with what they're trying to say, but it's just empty calories. There's nothing to it.
So my favorite part of it were actually the two women, especially the one that literally can't move. And I thought that was a really interesting way of doing it, but it doesn't make a movie. It's like they don't necessarily know what to do. Look, I never saw Attack the Block. So my John Boyega introduction was Imperial Dreams, that I didn't know who the fuck he was. And I went and watched this movie. I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And so I associate him as a Sundance actor, as crazy as that is. And so I was very pleased to see him in this film. And again, all the people are great, but I think absolutely right that the film is only okay. I mean, there's a bunch that we can jump around, but are there any other? Oh, well, let's go back to the palm trees. Did anybody else see that? I guess Pat and I did, but that is one that again ended up winning an award. I don't want to go too much into it. Eventually, I think it's a film that will get a little bit of attention, but weirdly, what it is, it's very much associated in a funny way with Sean Baker stuff. Because if you take elements of Florida Project and a lot of Red Rocket and take all the humor out, you get this film. It is very, very dark narratively, but in a weird way, it's cautious. So it's almost like it doesn't quite go so dark that it becomes unwatchable. And in a funny way, you almost want this story of a young woman being groomed by a man to almost go even more. If it was European, it would be like just horrendous. It would just be like you'd be watching just absolute obscenity, not in terms of censorship, but in terms of what you're watching. And so in a weird way, it's a palatable version of a really dark story. And the moments that work really work. It's really interesting, the way that it's framed, the characters, how you actually assume their motivations, all that stuff, it's there. But in a funny way, it feels almost like you're telling a story this goddamn dark in a dark way. You almost don't go far enough. Pat, just super briefly, if you think the same way.
Yeah, same way. Very like rapey tension. I appreciate what it tried to do, but
fair enough.
I'm never watching it again.
There we go. And how many of you guys got to see Living?
Oh, I loved that.
Yeah. So let's start with Rachel Ho first on Living.
I really loved it. I think it was probably my favorite thing that I watched at the all of Sundance. I really, really enjoyed it. Bill Nye, he's so good in it. He's so sad but not sad. Like, he's vulnerable but not vulnerable. Like, there's a really nice balance to the movie, and it flew by so quickly for me. Like, the minute the movie ended, I thought it had only been running for like 10-15 minutes because it was just so engrossing, and I really loved it. And the way that they shoot, it's like 1950s London or England in general, and it's beautiful. Like, it's absolutely gorgeous. And it's such a good
4-3.
yeah, it's in the 4-3. It's such a nice adaptation. I mean, like, Akira Kurosawa is not exactly it's quite a high standard to try to say we're going to do a movie that has already been made by one of the best directors that's ever done it. And they do it so perfectly well, and they inject, the Britishness, the Englishness into it. And it's heartbreaking, but it's also just a really beautiful film.
Just before we go to Pat,
the awards film of the festival,
I'm sorry?
the film that we were speaking about awards contenders earlier, and I think that's the one that could really break out and come back in the fall and be an awards contender.
For me, it was fascinating because Akira is absolutely one of my favorite Kurosawa films. It's actually the Kurosawa film that I show people who think Kurosawa is just a bunch of samurais, and it's so beautiful. But it has a very specific Japanese melodrama that I have to work through because I'm not a big fan of that. I'm actually not a huge Ozu fan where you get that sort of real still, you're just supposed to be there, and that's it. Like, I get it, and then I just get tired of it. But when Kurosawa does it, it elevates for me. And this film is fascinating because you have Kazuo Ishiguro writing it. So you have a Japanese individual who's lived in England for years, taking this very Japanese story and showing in this funny way, westernizing the strictures, westernizing that we know post-war Japan had very specific regimented ways of being, but to show that post-war England had the same and similar kinds of wounds is amazing. And I think that it is the great example of anything we've seen at this year's festival of, if you're going to remake something, make it its own, celebrate what it was, and allow it to both elevate what the original was and be its own thing. And I think if there's one miracle out of all the films that I saw, it's that, because you're absolutely right. Both of you are right. This is an easy film to have sucked, but it's a film that it's like, why it's redundant. Like, why would you need to do that? Well, why would Kurosawa need to redo Macbeth or King Lear, right? So there we go. Anyway, Pat, go ahead.
Well, it's funny. I rewatched Akira the week before Sundance, and I think I was saying to Jason, I like it, but I thought I wish it was 40 minutes shorter in color and in English. And so Living checks all three of those.
Check.
What I liked though was, like, watching it again after seeing Drive My Car, I liked the parallels with like how mannered it is and the restraint, and it just sort of whispers. So yeah, just the composition of the filmmaking. I think after Moffy, it shows that Oliver Jimenez is like one of the really exciting talents to watch, I think. And again, I have to echo what people said about Bill Nighy. I think that's just such a rich performance. And I'm all here for like the Love Actually takeover of next year's Oscars with Emma Thompson, and hopefully maybe Chiwetel Ejiofor and Keira Knightley will have something in the supporting categories. So,
Victor, did you get a chance to see Living?
Oh, I missed that one.
There you go. So you will have plenty of opportunity. That film is going to 100% play TIFF. If it doesn't open beforehand, that is absolutely going to get a massive awards push in September.
Yeah, I feel like to appreciate it, you have to go see it at like lunchtime at the Varsity.
Oh my God.
But,
it is a bit, I mean, there was a lot of Pat movies this year, but I mean, he occasionally works with us. I kept texting Matt Hoffman, who has a very big having tea with middle-aged people vibe about him. I think Bill Nighy, there's moments in this film where people are having tea. It's definitely that, but this, you're absolutely right. The ladies who lunch, this is their film, but it's much more than that. It's pretty extraordinary. Anyway, I've been bouncing back and forth. Are there any other titles that you guys really were excited about that you actually want to talk about? Those were ones that I definitely wanted to showcase. Let's start with Victor. Anything that comes to mind?
Emily the Criminal was just so much fun. It was just like a big shot of adrenaline for 90 minutes. Just a real sleazy LA crime story with a kick-ass lead performance by Audrey Plaza. Just so much fun. Yeah, I love heist movies and crime flicks, and it hit my sweet spot there.
There you go. Shane, anything come to mind that you want to go on about? Or maybe even something that really pissed you off?
Oh, one that pissed me off was Alice. I was so excited for that, and I wanted to see Keke Palmer in a lead role, and it had such an interesting premise about this woman who was still in slavery somehow in the 70s, and she escapes and becomes this badass like 70s woman. But I just felt like so much of it just didn't make sense, the way her character behaved in certain instances, especially on the plantation. And then when she comes out of it, like the transition, just a lot of it was on the nose, and it was very, very much, like forcing this empowerment message. And I just didn't think it pulled it off at all. I thought it was really a bad movie.
There you go. We'll go on, but Victor, I might as well ask you the same question. Was there anything that just really pissed you off, that really made you angry?
No, I didn't have any stinkers this year. I was lucky that way. Doesn't happen often.
Yeah, well, you chose wisely, as it were. Rachel, same thing. Something that we have. Rachel Ho. Something that I'm looking at you. Something that really worked for you that maybe we haven't discussed, and something that sort of wasn't your favorite.
Really worked for me. There was a Danish movie called Speak No Evil. I really enjoyed that one. It's like right up my street kind of thing. It's really disturbing. It's really dark and creepy, and it's quite twisted. I love Scandinavian movies as well. Like I always quite gravitate towards them because they have like a really weird sensibility over there, which I really connect with. So I really enjoyed that one. In terms of things that didn't work for me, I don't know. I think Call Jane was a bit mediocre for me. Like it feels weird saying it, but it's like they almost like Disney-fied an abortion story. And you kind of think like, on one hand, maybe it's a good thing because I think it's a bit more accessible for people who don't want to sit through like a really, dark and dreary abortion movie. But the fact is that is the story. Like it wasn't as sunshiny and flowers as they made it seem.
Well, did you see The Happening?
I didn't know.
There's your non-Disney version of that film.
So maybe you could like double feature them then.
100%. There's a bunch. Abortion was absolutely one of the themes going on, and The Happening, which won Venice, is very, very stark, but quite extraordinary. So anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there's one that does not sugarcoat a thing.
Well, And
No,
there
I
was-
like it was a fine movie. I had nothing against it. And Elizabeth Banks is actually really great in it. And I like seeing her doing more dramatic stuff as well. But yeah, I don't know. I just feel like it didn't really, I don't know if it did what they thought they were going to do with it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up Speak No Evil. I thought it was a lot of fun, and again, felt less like a Sundance midnight film and very much like a Cannes midnight film in the best way, right? That it's like, it's not really about, you kind of know where it's going and you don't really care because texturally it is so beautiful. And to your point, I mean, I mentioned that when back to Shane, when we were talking about the genre elements, the South Koreans and the Danes, I mean, this is the kind of film they have been doing for decades and are so goddamn good at doing. This is not the best version of that ever, but when it's good, it's great. And you're totally feeling those moments in the car and just totally going along literally for the ride and just like, it's great. Anyway, Pat, same continuation, something that maybe we haven't talked about and something that really aggravated you.
I wanted to, I guess, aggravation sort of add to what Rachel was saying about Call Jane, because that was probably the one I was most excited for the festival. And, you know, they had the documentary, The Janes, about the same group. And it was funny to watch that film and notice all the research that clearly went into Call Jane and like the details about how the organization worked. And, you know, I think like a lot of people, I felt like Call Jane just lacked conflict and there wasn't a lot that happened for, I mean, given the subject matter, you could have done things. And, you know, part of the documentary shows that they were a pretty well-oiled group and knew how to navigate things. But there were anecdotes that the interviewees gave that could have been a great scene in a movie, like, you know, one where the police were going up to catch them and how like the woman who got the abortion went into the elevator when the cops were coming out, and then they, you know, tracked her to the apartment where there were like 20 women waiting for a procedure. But then luckily one of the women brought a pork roast and they're like, oh, it's a lunch party. It's like, there could have been a good scene there. I thought though Sigourney Weaver in Call Jane was another performance to watch. Like she totally killed that. Otherwise, nothing else really, besides Jihad Rehab, there wasn't like send the programmers to jail. Sorry, I'm scrolling through the things I watched.
It's all good.
Actually, I quite liked it. I was pleasantly surprised with, oh no, one that disappointed me was To the End, because I was such a fan of Knock Down the House. And so this is Rachel Lears doing more or less the same thing with another group of activists covering the Green New Deal. But one of them again is AOC. And, you know, sort of how Knock Down the House was so exciting was because she was following 4 people and AOC took off and it was just, you know, right person, right time, great footage. But in this case, you have like someone who knows how to work a camera and work a room, sharing storylines with like 20-year-old activists, you know, fresh out of college. And it doesn't quite work. And again, it's another one that, you know, once the pandemic comes in and everything changes, even though they are talking about things that happened like December 2021, it felt dated.
Right.
So
and I'm the one that thought her first film was just like a giant commercial of nonsense. I know you liked it much more in this one. I'm like, oh, you don't want me to cover this one. Ms. West, something you loved and something that pissed you off.
Not so much. I don't think anything really pissed me off. There were a couple of disappointments. I thought Honk for Jesus, Save Your Soul would have been better. It was just lacking something for me. I think something like the Righteous Gemstones TV series does a similar theme better. But I enjoyed one called Watcher about Micah Monroe as a woman who moves to Romania, doesn't really speak the language, and thinks there is a man watching her, following her. And it's not quite a, you know, fresh new story that we've, you know, haven't seen before, but I like the approach of it. And I actually, as far as like the quirky fun ones go, I liked Brian and Charles, about the guy who makes himself a robot friend out of a washing machine that just happens to look just like Jim Broadbent. Yeah. So, you know, it was one of the lighter,
Jim Broadbent.
It was one of the lighter, sort of more fun ones. I really didn't like You Won't Be Alone. I feel like Shane liked it on Letterboxd. I feel like we had the opposite reactions when I looked at Letterboxd.
What do you
It's
think,
a very
Shane?
divisive film just by the nature of it. So you're gonna have polarizing reactions to that one for
Tell us what
sure.
it's about. Give us the log line.
Go ahead, Rachel.
I feel like as somebody who liked the movie, I think you should.
Oh, it's about it's a Macedonian film, and it's
So it's dark.
It's what
It's
if
another-
Terrence Malick made a horror movie?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
another genre film, and it's this
Stuff happens. I'm not putting you on the
Yeah.
spot. It's all good.
Yeah.
We should just see it. We'll just give it a shot. That's the way festival
go
works.
see it.
It's
It's
again
really
like isolated mountain village, 19th
Yeah.
century. It's definitely one of those ones where I think the synopsis sold me on it, but then the movie didn't deliver what the synopsis promised.
Fair enough. Now, just on my thing, a film that I think I'm the only one in the world that actually liked as much as I did, which is one of the opening films, When You Finish Saving the World, the Jesse Eisenberg. I actually really enjoyed it. We talked about the sort of Jewish adjacent stuff that's going on. I talked. I generally think that there's something very specific about this film, about the converted mom and the son, and the dynamic between two people that are together because they're family, but they don't really like each other. I like that dynamic of the mom who just isn't friends with her son and finds someone else to be friends with, and the son that, sort of understands his mom but has much different way of doing. And the way the dynamic plays out, it's absolutely brings in all the quirks of Eisenberg, the stuff that we're sort of used to him doing. And for me, it really worked. I don't know, did anybody else see it? Did anybody else? Yeah, there you go.
I liked it as well.
yeah.
The performances are so specific from Leanne Moore and Finn Wolfhard. So I was on its wavelength. It's an interesting debut. Yeah.
But you can see
I
how
will say
specific
you
it
can
is. Go on.
see, yeah, I will say you can see Jesse Eisenberg in every character and every scene.
Yeah, and that's
Better
what I
or
loved
worse.
about it. But I'm funny that way. And again, I'm not. It's talk about somebody that if you mention their name, your Twitter goes crazy. That's one. And then there's Klondike. Actually, Pat and I were on a jury with some Ukrainian filmmakers, and they're the ones that pushed us to see it. Klondike is really goddamn depressing, but there's moments of it that are really quite stunning. And it was super. It's about the Donbass region when the Russians actually came. They blow up a house and all the dynamic right when the Malaysian plane gets blown up and I guess 6-7 years ago. And so the film is extremely dark and extremely depressing, but says really interesting political things about identity and the community and all these stuff. And it is crazy surreal to be watching that film while on the news what we're seeing is the exact same dynamic play out. So in terms of all the films that played, the stuff that feels like we're watching something from the near past, but absolutely is reflective about what's going on now, that one was, for me, a fiction film that played almost like a documentary. Pat, I think so. Did anybody else see Klondike or want to speak to it?
I'm watching it tonight.
There you go. Spoiler. There's one that is way up. Nobody was talking about that film, but that one was sort of, that would have been awesome for you guys to wander in that sort of 2 PM, you got nothing else to see and be super depressed about this film. Amazing performances, really strong script, and visually really, really interesting how it was done. Okay, so wrapping up, here we are, yet another year of Sundance. We've certainly gone on about a bunch of stuff. Any last comments? Anybody want to jump in on something that we haven't actually talked about?
I thought the platform was amazing, and I really liked how there was no like geo-block access like we've had with TIFF and Hot Docs, where we're not the local audience, but there's some picking and choosing on who gets to see what. I think Sundance has really done the virtual festival like democratically and smoothly.
And again, not to sort of in any way diminish Pat's option, I actually was suffering from geo-block when I tried to see a film. I was unable to because I was Canadian, not because I was in Canada, but because I was in Canadian, and actually had to have the press office, because of my badge level, actually allow me to actually see Navalny, which I had the code to see, but couldn't buy the ticket to use the code because I was listed as Canadian. And so for those with different access levels, that wasn't an issue. That being said, at TIFF, Pat's absolutely right. There are films that even though I was a Canadian covering for the United States, I was unable to get a link for a film because of all the drama. This is part of the sort of weirdness of all these virtual festivals that we're all having to navigate as people, watching this stuff. I know it seems crazy inside baseball nonsense, but it really does affect our ability. This was the fewest number of Sundance films I've ever seen during a festival, in part because I didn't have the option of continuing to marathon like we did last year. Last year, when you had your window, you could actually go and just keep watching stuff. This time, they severely restricted the number of films that we could actually see. And yes, I got a lot of links, and yes, it was very beneficial, but I didn't get that sense of discovery in quite the way that I would have liked had I had a little bit more flexibility as somebody who, like we did with Victor, stays to the bloody end, right? Stays right to the option of you're still discovering stuff on day 6, 7, or 8 of the festival. Anyway, there's my little blurb. Either Rachel, anything that you want to contribute as we're wrapping up? We're good. We've talked enough.
There's one more
Victor.
thing a lot of people didn't take
There we go.
advantage of, is there's a really cool social spaces aspect where you can jump online for the New Frontier platform, and you're on a virtual avatar, and you can walk into these different lobbies. You can experience the New Frontier installations, or you can just go into these little chat rooms and meet other people with media access, other critics, other people who are just there because they bought a ticket, and you can talk about films. So a big part of a film festival is standing in lineups for hours and just mingling and meeting people and saying, what have you seen? What did you like? You can actually do that online. And I'm really surprised to hear a lot of people just didn't know you could do that.
I knew you could do it, and I had no interest in doing it. So you tell me how I'm wrong. You did it. What was it like?
It's fun, right? I didn't have time to do it as much as I wanted. I just like jump in and get my feet wet to say that I did. I always try and sample a few of the VR installations, and it's pretty smooth. Really, like the whole online platform this year went pretty smooth. I didn't really have a lot of hiccups, and it doesn't take any time. You can log in, create a profile in 30 seconds, and you don't know who you're going to meet. You can meet a New York Times film critic or someone from the other side of the world who's just really excited to watch a really cool feature.
Awesome. Now, you guys have all had your feet wet with Sundance. Did anything about this make you think that, yes, this is worth me buying a flight to go to Park City to see the caliber of films in person? We'll start with Shane. Would you actually fly to Utah to go see movies at Sundance?
I mean, I think the virtual festivals have been really well executed. I still think it's on my bucket list still, so I would want to go in person, get the atmosphere of Sundance. So it's a yes for me.
And Rachel, how?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I'm still pretty new at this, so it's all very novel to me. And the idea of like flying to Utah, which is not something I would normally do, to just for a film festival, I mean, I think we're lucky that or a lot of us here are lucky that we're based out of Toronto, so TIFF isn't too far away for us to get to. But yeah, I've always liked the idea of going to actually to like flying somewhere purposely for a film festival. So I would have loved to have, and there was like a moment that I thought about applying for an in-person pass, but then I smartened up and I thought, this is stupid. Like, you're going to get stuck in the States, so there's no point. And I'm glad I didn't, because that would have been a real pain in the ass.
Yeah, I had an in-person pass that had to be changed but I made that decision myself and let them know in November. I'm like, this is not happening. I'm not coming. I'm like, I heard about this Greek letter called Omicron. And I thought, that sounds like a transformer, but it's literally transformative. Pat, I know that obviously it's a little bit different, but like, do you have like, is it something that if you had to fly to a festival, is this the one? That might be a better idea. If you were flying to a festival, would you fly to Sundance, or there's another festival you'd rather attend?
Well, I mean, I would fly to Sundance if it didn't mean putting you out of a job.
Fair enough.
So
independent.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to go. Because I mean, before I was always like, oh, anything worth seeing will come to Hot Docs. That's not the case. And I think yeah, like, no, this is where, at least for documentary, like you want to be and everything starts.
Yeah,
So,
perfect.
yeah, for sure.
And Rachel, I know there was talk of you actually going this year. Rachel West.
This should have been my first in-person Sundance. I had an in-person accreditation for work. And then in December, we decided, ooh, Omicron's a thing here in Canada. So we pulled the plug about 2 weeks before Sundance went virtual. So yeah, I would like to go. Would it be my first choice for a film festival? I'd still probably pick Cannes to go to. Having also done South by Southwest film a number of times, I would like the experience of Sundance, but I think I actually like the Austin vibes. Different caliber, different type of film, but a lot of fun.
And Victor, I know you got to go the 1 year. Are you every time that you're not there, does it feel like you're missing out, or you think you're getting everything or close to everything that you got by being there, by doing it virtually?
Oh, I miss it with all my heart. Every time the film starts up and you see the little montages of Park City, a part of my heart sinks. It's just so cozy and intimate, and they have their closing night gala party in a recreation center. There's just something about the sense of community you have when you're boots on the ground in Sundance. You can't match it virtually. It's so much more thrilling.
There you go. And from my perspective, like, I miss going there. Financially, it's insane. It's a total nightmare. Logistically, you have hours that you gotta do between screenings and all that stuff, and the entire time there you have altitude sickness. You're trying to get a corn dog from the grocery store just so you get some protein into you at some point in time, and yet fundamentally there's no festival that changed my professional life, in some ways my personal life, than Sundance. It's the first year I went is where I met Joe Berlinger. We ended up working on some stuff together. It's where I interviewed Chaz Ebert, because I went specifically for the Ebert doc, Life Itself. Connections with Steve James. Over the last few years, I've been doing fewer and fewer interviews at Sundance. So one of the nice things about virtual is the ability to at least do some of that. I do not it would be awesome. Would have been awesome to hang out with W. Kamau Bell in there in Park City, but to have missed the 3 films that it would have taken me to actually make that happen, I don't miss. So the ability to watch on my couch is one thing, but I miss desperately the ability to actually see some of these films with an audience. Some of them would have been absolutely spectacular with an audience that would have elevated. That being said, a midnight at the library, so many of the midnight films that play are actually probably better if you're watching them at 4 p.m. rather than at midnight and trying to stay awake for them. So there's a balance here, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in 2023. All I know is that we'll be back. We'll be talking about it somehow. Thank you guys so much for yet another Sundance. Thanks to any of you who's actually watched this right to the end. If there's any last moments, I think that we're good, but otherwise this is a wrap for Sundance 2022. We got hot docs coming up. We got other festivals. We got some South by stuff coming. Cannes will be in May. We got TIFF in September. Lots of coverage, and obviously here there's a ton of video coverage to check out. Do check out thatshelf.com for all the reviews that we talked about. Look at the bios for all the individuals here for some of the other elements they've been covering. And there we are for another year. Thank you guys so much, and thanks for everything that you guys did to make this year a really great one for Sundance. All the best. Bye.
Bye.